Hi, everyone. Welcome to Segue. I'm Imogen Christian Smith. My pronouns are they, them.
Hi, I'm Kate Gabriel. My pronouns are she and her. Before we get started, we first acknowledge that we're calling from Lenape-Hoking on the traditional lands of the Lenape, Shinnecock, Munsee, and Canarsie peoples. The resources used in the production of this series have been culled from stolen lands far and near, that both artist space as well as our homes, places of commune, work, and learning, were built by hands other than our own by people with varying histories, traditions, hopes, mourning, and vision for the ongoingness of their communities. We encourage participants in this gathering to learn about the history of the land where they live and the contemporary structures of possession and dispossession that we can intervene in principled and solidaristic ways against the contemporary regimes of capital, colony, and property.
We're really excited to present readings over the next few Saturdays, broadcasting from our homes to yours. After today's reading with Amber Dawn and Kai Cheng Thom, we'll hear from Jackie S. and Diana Cage. Then lastly, for Kay and I's curation, at least, we'll have Anais Duplan and Legacy Russell. The readings are presented and recorded through Artist Space, and we want to say thank you to the Artist Space staff, to Izzy, Dow, Stella Silman, Jay Sanders, and Eric Wren, who designed the tiles for the series. The readings will be broadcast every Saturday at 5 Eastern Standard Time, so mark your calendars and tell all your friends, and they'll be recorded and live online afterwards on the Artist Space website, so you can go watch them again or check out what you might have missed. The suggested donation is $5, and you can donate via PayPal, Venmo, or through the Segue website, and check the chat for specific details for the donations link that will appear and reappear throughout the reading. Here's the run of show for tonight. First, Kay will introduce Amber Dawn. Amber Dawn's gonna read. We'll have an intermission. Then I'll introduce Kai Cheng Thom. Kai Cheng will read, and we'll finish with a Q&A. We encourage everyone to use the Q&A function that you can see at the bottom of your screens to send questions to the artists. And please don't be shy. It's been a really fun part of the series.
Yeah, thanks, Imogen. It's definitely a really fun part. And yeah, happy birthday, Kai Cheng. It's wonderful of you to join us. Um, I Sorry, I want to let everyone know I had my second dose of the vax today, so I sort of feel like I'm underwater right now. Nonetheless, this is I would rather be here than anywhere else. I'm going to introduce our first reader. Amber Dawn is a white queer femme survivor living on unceded Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh territories. She is the author of 5 books and the editor of 3 anthologies. Her most recent, My Art is Killing Me, is a collection of long-form poems that speaks to cultural and sexual harassment in the literary arts sector. Amber Dawn is a true believer in narrative, and she can tell it with a capaciousness of verse. Reading her poems is often like reading a fable without a moral. In Robert Gluck's and Bruce Boone's slantwise gay translations of La Fontaine's animal fables, the collaborators write, quote, "Now here's one I like," or "Stop me if you've heard this. But this story's the exception. It's vouched for by science and actually happened. You judge." That's an idea that Amber Dawn varies with related emphasis. Quote, "You, literally you, are reading queer and desperate poetry, and so I already love you like a stopped clock. But if you're wondering whether or not I took that Alabamian mother's money to fuck her virgin son, then you too better kneel down and pray." By a fable without a moral, I mean her poems are full of character and incident, but nobody gets what's coming to them, not even the cops. What, did you think this was a movie? Quote, "When I had cock in my mouth, I never pictured Hollywood endings, though sometimes I did loop lines of poetry in my mind." Amber Dawn commits hard to, quote, "veering into queer grit again, a detour well off the road of religious trajectory and into a messy and beloved contingency." What would it mean to feel love, compassion, or forgiveness in a poem? I think this is a question Amber Dawn's work is interested in asking, insofar as it extends keen understanding to harm, hurt, and fucking up. She writes, quote, "My body has breath and spasm where it should have words." And she offers this breath and spasm generously. In her poem, An Apple or Haunted, she writes, "In my family, we love each other from 100 yards away, a restraining order kind of love." Quote, I'd like to say something true and complete about compassion, end quote. And the openness of the line break offers space for completion to rush in, which is sort of, I think, what I mean when I say that she is a true believer in narrative and she can tell it with a capaciousness of verse. In the same poem, recounting a letter from a family member that could probably be described as cruel, she notes, quote, a small tear between O's, where his pen heavily retraced the vowels like an infinity symbol, which is the kind of repetition or continuity that Amber Dawn's unflinching, warm-blooded understanding aims to interrupt. She does so, at least in part, through her own writing and also for opening space for other voices and community. As you heard in her introduction, she's edited 3 anthologies, and having just edited 1, I am sort of blown over by the amount of work I'm sure that took, as that is very labor intensive, but very necessary. So that's it's a beautiful gift that we give each other. In her introduction to Hustling Verse, an anthology of sex workers' poetry co-edited with Justin Ducharme, Amber Dawn writes, quote, sex workers, contrary to what we're forced to believe about ourselves, are not afraid of our own stories. We're not afraid to be messy and raw, to be forthright and unrestrained, and to be as expressive as holy fuck. To sit at a table with sex workers reading their first and spontaneous poetry is, I repeat, to rise above subjugation. In her cultural organizing through workshops and anthologies, Amber Dawn opens space for that expression, so often shut down elsewhere, as sex workers, queers, and trans people are treated as what Trish Salah calls the, quote, objects, not subjects of discourse. Working from and to convene community, Amber Dawn intervenes with an open heart. And please join us in welcoming her to Segue.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. Did any of your Segue Reading Series guests feel so gobsmacked by how beautiful the introduction is that they just need a minute? I think I just need a minute. Yeah, thank you so much, Kay. You flatter me and you see me, and it's what a wonderful way to start a reading. I am going to be reading from 2, maybe 3 of my books if I can squeeze it in there. And the first book that I'm going to read from, Kay was so generous to mention My Art is Killing Me and Other Poems. And I opened this book with a bit of a content note and an author statement. I'll get started with just reading some of that author's statement. Several of the poems explore how trauma, sexual violence in particular, shapes story, both how stories are told and how stories are consumed by observers and audiences. Other themes include criminalized poverty, white supremacy, cyberbullying, internet harassment, and mental health crises. Early drafts of My Art is Killing Me were composed amid conversations with other writers that occurred between late 2015 and early 2017, a time in which rape culture, racism, and tokenism became even more pressing to me than the ongoing gravity and frequency of these topics. Plainly put, I seem to be constantly debriefing dumpster fire bullshit occurring within the literary sector. So alongside of other responses and actions, I turn to poetry to engage with some of these harms that I personally experienced and witnessed. So really what I'm saying here is this book isn't like an easy swallow. It's a bit of a challenging book. But I'm gonna get started actually. And again, hearing Kay's generous and beautiful introduction, I'm gonna read one of the poems that she quoted called The Stopped Clock. I was costumed in a white tiger stripe bodysuit when I found out I'd been accepted into the graduate creative writing program at the University of British Columbia. The bodysuit was one size too small, and my labia majora squeezed out from either side of the gusset whenever I sat down. I sat with the other sluts, most of whom I loved like a stopped clock, around a lopsided card table inside a renovated steel barn in Huntsville, Alabama. At first, we were nervous, hauling our tickle trunks and drag bags into such a rough-hewn hideaway. A barn? And pretty far outside the city. What kind of place was this for a titty show, we wondered. But there were fairy lights strung around the stage and an old-fashioned jukebox beside the bar. And when our host brought us warm tamales wrapped in tinfoil and a 1-gallon jug of homemade moonshine, we settled into the dressing room just fine. From the moonshine, I expected what I expect of every spirit stronger than 70 proof. I expected to inhabit my body with magnificent conviction and be fully dissociated at the same time. And maybe this is poetry, to be both in and out of my own body. Moonshine flint behind my ear as my cell phone screen lit up with a 604 area code, a Vancouver area code. The admissions secretary's voice was high and bright, despite her calling from 4,000 kilometers away. She said, "I am so happy for you, and your acceptance letter is in the mail, and you should really apply for a scholarship." Did the admissions secretary personally call every student who had been accepted? Did she know my livelihood was pussy tap? It's likely the entire selections committee knew the writing sample in my application was packed with poems about men's billfolds. The club MC announced my big news to the audience. Their clanging applause surprised me. It shouldn't have, because a whore that goes to college is adorable. Live nude crook to hit the books is a narrative string any fella can feel good about tucking a fiver into. The woozy deck stage caught my stiletto as I crossed into the dusty yellow spotlight. The sound of my knees pounding the floor was barely audible against the sonic boom of burlesque. And besides, what's another bruise? What's a bruise? What's a bruise? What's a blue moon bruise to do but pull young blood to and fro like the tide? What's a bruise but a testament to the sharp art of surrendering to time and place, and how I surrendered to that stage. I bowed down to ageless filth and glitter and leaked fluid. Oh, striptease stage, oh, hallowed ground. I prayed to the ghost of every hustler who's turned rock ballads into rent, turned grind into gold. I was going to grad school. Masters of fucking arts. I face down, belly rolled until I met God or a staph infection. Same difference. Nah. This is definitely nostalgia talking. The truth is, I uprighted myself and finished my set just like any other night. There was a mother in the audience, maybe several mothers, but this particular mother presented me with her virgin teenage son after my set. I remember she wore a string of pearls, and I presumed this was because we were in Alabama. The mother in pearls was interested in buying sex for her teenage son. He has to become a man before going off to college. She was certain it was his virginity that hindered him from the kingdom and the power of manhood. What she wasn't sure of was how much I should be paid for my service. Sometimes I wonder, though I do not care in the slightest, if pity was the reason I was accepted into the creative writing program at the University of British Columbia. Was I their redemption story candidate that year? Fun fact, an anagram for creative writing is tragic interview. I would have to veer into fantasy to continue this story about Alabama. I can't remember anything about the virgin teenage son, except that we were both about to be students in the fall. When I try to think about what this virgin looked like, I superimposed the geek from the 1984 film 16 Candles and alternatively Brian from The Breakfast Club, a John Hughes constructed outcast crying over thwarted masculinity and a tenuous ability to subjugate teenage women's bodies. You see, I grew up with movies that taught me the meek shall inherit the prom. or the geek shall inherit access to a blackout drunk cheerleader. Same difference? But life rarely mimics a Hollywood ending, or does it? I don't know how life works anymore. One thing is for sure, sex work isn't going anywhere. You, literally you, are listening to my queer and desperate poetry, and so I thank you, and I love you like a stopped clock. But I don't have to tell you whether or not I took that Alabamian mother's money to fuck her virgin son. And maybe this is poetry. Maybe poetry is when we both confess parts of the story and keep other parts for ourselves. 9 days later, the other sluts dropped me and my bag full of animal print lingerie and the small, grimy bills I earned as tips off at O'Hare Airport in Chicago. They kept touring the Midwest, Milwaukee, maybe Minneapolis, and then eventually into the lonesome sphere of memory. These days, if I can't find an old friend through Google, I worry they're dead. I flew back to Vancouver to attend the University of British Columbia, where more than one creative writing professor warned me not to treat poetry like a therapy session. I'm going to read one more from this book, again, which is, it's quite a tough book. It was really tough to write. And I believe it's tough and generous work for the audience to listen. So again, thank you so much. So, as that poem illuminated, I did my master's in creative writing at what would be considered a top tier school here in Vancouver, University of British Columbia. And then, because I love suffering, I decided to go an adjunct there in the creative writing program for 8 years. So I could be in harm's way for even longer. So I'm going to write about that. I'm going to read about that experience. It's called Outsider Artist. A young man in a team jersey waits for me at the back of the lecture hall. We just wrapped our penultimate introduction to craft class, and I prepare to be asked for an extension, calculating assignment deadlines and marking time in my mind as I come up the low pile carpeted stairs. End of term thrashes, students. The entire campus is hard swollen. I can give him an extra 3 days or 5. The projectors whir as they power down. Screens behind me blink black. I turn back to see 400 empty swivel chairs and become suddenly cognizant of my gait. Do I appear damaged to him, like a woman who's had her pelvis fractured? I am a woman who's had her pelvis fractured. Smile, I remind myself. Stay open. Stay generous. I heard that you used to, his slow motion mouth. Me and some of the guys from the team were talking. He stands between me. We looked you up online and the exit door. I should say no naked photos, assert a student professor boundary, porno, redirect him. Then my TA motions in the periphery. Women's intuition, she tells me as she walks me back to my office. She got a weird feeling. Afterwards, I automate through conversations with counseling services, academic advising, the director of the equity office. I decline to speak with the team coach directly. When I recount what happened to the equity director, I wonder if she thinks I deserve it. What if she is the type of feminist who romances a rarefied anti-violence movement? If only sex workers and trans women would just drop out of sight. Addressing rape culture on campus is laborious enough without a femme presenting ex-hooker in the lecture hall. calm down, I caution myself. I censor the word pornography, even though porn is what the young man in the team jersey said. He said his team found my naked body on the internet. He could describe my naked body, and I'm afraid to say the word porn to the equity director. Moving forward, campus security escorts me to and from my last class, compulsory counseling for the young man. Only alone with my wife at the dinner table do I cry about how stupid I am for believing I could teach a whole term without being sexually harassed, without my history or identity wrung. How many times must I be hard taught the same lesson? Disclosure is a greater risk to me than to the men whose violence I speak to. This is true for all women. The shame of backsliding into psychic poverty, associative injury, the familiar pull and knot of pain that makes talking to the equity director the same as talking to police officers, social workers, the intake nurse at the short-term treatment center years ago. So-called power holders who required my story to be worded a specific way before support was granted or not. And the whiteness that tipped me the script, and the whiteness that ensured I was heard, and my whiteness that believes I deserve to tell my survivor's story, and one day I might even be paid for such damn courage. Be shown the stage, the lectern, the interview, the shortlist, the ceremony. The young man in a team jersey calls all of this bone close again. And one more thing. I feel alone. I don't know who I can trust at the academy or at the author's table, myself included. Who do I confide in when pain is my performance and my praxis? I have watched pavement dry sponge my blood. My attacker left me for dead and gone years ago, and somehow still bone close. So yes, I know how to stand back up. I'm just not sure who I'm standing up with anymore. Where do I belong after I've wrote myself as an outsider? All right, let's just do a little refresh, a little switch of gears. I'm going to have a sip of water here. I'd like to read a couple more poems. They're much shorter than the poems in this last book. The last book is sort of a lyric essay. And this is where the words begin or where the words end and my body begins, which is a glossiform poem. So a little bit tighter. But what's really cool about the glossiform poem is that it's intertextual. It allows the glossateer, if you will, to work with a quatrain. So 4 lines from another poet and build off of that. So I wanted to read first 4 lines from Brenda Shaughnessy, who I believe so many of you will know. I worked with a quatrain from her, and that reads, I'm angry. I'll take back the night, using me to swoon at your questionable light. You had me chasing you, the world's worst lover, over and over. Queer infinity. We tried to make the 2000s a hold-fast decade. Many of us got sober or adopted cockeyed dogs named Radar. We craved long-term goals, 5-year plans, but why? When this time the world really seemed to be ending. Supermoon, Katrina, Cyclone Stan, Frankenstorm, ice caps melted in our ozone, epic bubbles burst. We knew there'd be no reply during the tsunami. Still, we phoned Kerala and Chiang Mai. Our queer transmigrant family spanned the 4 corners. There's a crisis in every time zone. It's true. I'm angry. I'll take back the night, Use me to call Amsterdam at midnight to relay a friend's death notice. Use your car to drive to the airport and to the airport again. Use her stovetop to make 2 weeks worth of one-pot meals for the freezer. Use my axe to chop wood for the funeral fire. Use each other's raw bodies to remind ourselves how to pray. Queer grief is a blueprint. We got this shit wired tight. Maybe we've become too good at losing. Are we trauma bonded? I can't speak for the whole, only myself. I'd sooner howl at a wounded moon. Yes, I might swoon at a questionable light, but at least I still swoon. My scabby kneecaps may always weep pink. I'm so often floored. I'll never be a 2 feet on the ground girl. Let me guess. Age didn't temper your passion either. Let me guess. Your passion, like mine, only became more strategic. It's not called a movement for nothing. Anonymous or rough, queer sex was our coup de coeur. Many of us couldn't love ourselves until our gaping pasts were licked like wounds. Young guns and leather boots, odd ones with knuckle tattoos. You had me chasing you for years before I understood what I was after. An antidote that smote with the same sweet fever as the venom. Pain can be fine if you share the sting. Stomach those poisons together. Many of us gathered our lovers, renamed friends sister and brother. We wrote the books that queerlings now read in college. We made films to screen at Sundance. Our scrappy manifestos got exposure, 3 million YouTube views and counting. Let's erect guerrilla monuments to those that didn't make it. Never confuse hold fast with hold still. There's so much yet to do. Swoon, I say, swoon forever. Apathy is the world's worst lover, and yet over and over again, this is our queer infinity. All right, I'm going to read one more for you, same form. This one quotes a Canadian poet who lives in Montreal named Sina Caris, and her 4 lines read, "Which lifetime, beyond what brawn, who knew where the road would take us? Neat, neat, the rows of apple trees, there in the valley, red summers, the heat." Something happened to me at Backroads Pizza in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Locals say the land is magic, although white people are always claiming land is magic. The woman who non-consensually hugged too long wore bone jewelry, worshiped Gaia, and wanted me to know that because I live in this world, I must love all the world. Over her shoulder, I watched genderqueer acrobats Valdez on the pool table. A loner empty his flask into a can of cola. I ached with odd longing, but from which lifetime, beyond what brawn, who or what was I lovesick for? Crying can help. Eyeball orgasms release endorphins and past lives, psychic saltwater, they say. I licked a ramekin of peppermint gravy clean at Ria's Bluebird in Atlanta, Georgia. Simone de la Ghetto beat Clyde over the picnic table. Juba carefully considered his huevos. Jerry Lee his bacon. Annie Oakley and Scarlet Harlot's Cardinal Mains bookended the morning, the movement, our mantra. We are artists, innovators, geniuses, geniuses, innovators, artists, artists, innovators, and we are hungry at infinity. I presumed I knew where the road would take us, not the interstate. The intersections of our remarkable survival would be the place where we landed. I was younger, and homecoming seemed far more romantic than fuck coming. Queer fuck was everywhere. Home was a blue sky, all but sci-fi idea. Maybe Fancyland in Humboldt, California. Maybe Idle Dandy near Nashville, Tennessee. A place with a goat named Ali Sheedy. The free chickens all named Kiki. That's the dream, right? On the other side of mighty America, where the eggs in the nest aren't normal, grapevines aren't neat. The rows of apple trees aren't really rows at all, just fruit, handsomely idling like the lackadaisical stacks of books at Modern Times Collective in San Francisco, where I abandoned the pages of Go magazine to scope the daydreamy staff person behind the till. Their name, pronouns, relationship status, dating preferences, and kinks unknown, but so precious with the paperback spine of the left hand of darkness. I imagined my daisy print underwear in their teeth. I carried my fantasies along scorching 24th Street. Why must I wear black in August? I always fall in flummoxed love. There in the valley, red summers, that heat. Thank you so much. That's the poetry that I brought for you today. Thank you for your kind attention.
And Amber, Dawn, that was beautiful. Thank you so much. Really heartfelt, and just like stunning to hear. Thank you so much. We are going to go to an intermission. It's about 5 minutes. Take care of yourselves. Get a drink, whatever's good for you. We will be back with Kai Cheng Thom, whose birthday it is, so don't go anywhere.
Hi, welcome back, everybody. Before we get started, I want to thank Amber Dawn for that amazing, beautiful, just like deep reading. And also say that cover by Big Joni of Cranes in the Sky is really hot. I've listened to it like 500 times in the past 8 hours because I'm an Aquarius. Okay, here we go. Kai Cheng Thom. My whole heart. Kai Cheng Thom is a writer, performer, community worker, lasagna lover, and wicked witch based in Toronto. She is the author of several award-winning books, including the essay collection, I Hope We Choose Love, A Trans Girl's Notes from the End of the World. There it is. To know Kai Cheng Thom's work is to hear her words float through the mess of ongoing colonial deprivation, occasionally teasing towards some faggots and their friend-style utopia where all the girls brandish switchblades and groovy nicknames as they stand up for each other against creeps and cops. A big fuck you to the gloom of cloistered queer youth and a call to find your sisters to enter into the world. More often, however, Kai Cheng's work invites us to dwell in the murk we'd rather not admit to holding in our hands, our muscles, sinews, and bones, our femcocks and history writ over our skin. The awful fact that any of us, at any moment, might easily choose harm over love, whatever the context and material truths may be. The pursuit of holding space for the nuances, even hypocrisies of love that might make us most human, most aspirationally queer. As much as living trans or somewhere other than a bookend of binary is an argument for fully inhabiting one's body in motion, it is also a way of being receptive to the currents of history, colonization, immigration, social movement, discourse, pop music, poetry, sex, lust, and harm, either inflicted or reduced, recreated daily alongside your chosen ones. Quote, you pushed your mouth against mine, Kai Cheng writes. I want to tell you, I have come to the wounded. I want to tell you, you have come to the wounded for healing. Like you, I am imperfect flesh, and my experience of violence has made me no less likely to harm you. History is doomed to repeat itself. Colonization and rape are written on my bones. I want to tell you, I am trying. Like you, I have come to the wounded for healing. We are two scars pressed together, trying to give birth to new skins. Floating the question, quote, how integral is suffering to my sense of self, end quote, Kai Cheng's novel, Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars, a dangerous trans girl's confabulous memoir, introduces the reader to a cast of lovers, lipstick lacerators, sex workers, abusive doctors, and heinous cops acting like heinous cops. We meet trans elders holding on, getting over, somewhere in their 30s, aiding and cajoling, flirting and fucking, fighting their way late night to daylight on the street of miracles, a place that could double for any district of any city where queers and other marginalized folk so defined inhabit, providing all the life while living precariously on scars and scraps. The novel is like a hybrid YA book for trans girls of all ages, a fairy tale of magic gay realism that barely masks sublime themes of race and class-based conflict, threatening to undermine any sense of solidarity and communal vision in the moments it's most needed. Such is the world we move through, become in. To quote Alzana the witch, you will be able to stop hurting people when you can stop hurting yourself. The narrator of Fierce Femmes can't save her dangerous, messy community from the violent wreck of the world, not completely at least. She can, however, soften the ways she interfaces with it, baking it cakes and remembering its tallest tales. This understanding, one of many arrivals we encounter in the novel, is mirrored by Kai Cheng the activist in her essay, I Hope We Choose Love, notes on the application of justice. Quote, I'm not a believer in justice because I have never gotten it from or against those who have harmed me. I really am not certain that it would be good for me if I did. As a whole, we have a tendency to escalate rather than de-escalate conflict. In our rightful desire to ensure that harm is not minimized or ignored, we use inflammatory language, binary concepts of right and wrong, and oversimplified narratives. We do not ask the questions that are central to transformative justice. Why has harm occurred? Who is responsible beyond the individual perpetrator? As in, how is community implicated? How can this harm be prevented in the future? End quote. Understandably, those of us who come from and live with harm in all the myriad forms that capitalist, imperialist, genocidal, patriarchal, heteronormative white supremacy smush against our bodies on the daily, don't necessarily want to ask these questions. Too often we seek to isolate, shame, and banish, aka using the very same tools these systems use against so many of us. For me, what's truly radical about the girls in Fierce Femmes, what is, in my opinion, Kai Cheng's most generous gift to trans literature, is that she gives us girls who are assholes, real jerks, girls who hurt each other to assuage their own hurt, girls who bicker, who can't sync visions, girls who are angry and hungry and ugly and violent, who are so deeply hurt and beautifully flawed in all the ferocity of their resilience. It's a work I return to again and again in the soft pink light of the room I've built, glimpsing myself in the fuck-ups and earnestness of our narrator, the letters to her younger sibling, which might also be her younger self, in all the girls I've met and meet who either save my life or teach me how not to be, often embodied in the same character, the same human being. Nothing is more real. Quote, dear femmes, we live in difficult and dangerous times, it is true, but as long as we have our stories and we have each other, then we have hope, and this is the greatest magic of all. Quote again, sometimes all you can do is lie on the sofa in your big sister trans girl's apartment and wrap yourself in blankets and barely, just barely, cling to life as nightmares swarm up all around you. Herein are openings from which to dream our way towards a queerer kind of justice, one able to hold complexity and multiplicities of hurt, harm, accountability, and rest, ones not modeled on the systems of Euro colonial carceral justice, whose interests lie far from the utopic. In work that spans from novel to poems, essays to infographics, Kai Cheng Thom's work gifts one of many starting points from which to listen to one another, to fight the fascism of forgetting and erasure with something far more complex, something that honors human dignity. Quote, hunger is a story you get stuck in. Love's the story that takes you somewhere new. Please join me in welcoming and wishing a happy birthday week to Kai Cheng Thom.
Oh my God. I totally like cried as you were reading that introduction. Imogen, oh my goodness, like total. I was like, oh my God, I'm just gonna have a single romantic tear. And then I just started like bawling a little bit. You know, I was in a like mentorship session with like an elder sex worker a few weeks ago. And she said to me, you know, people fall in love when you really listen to them. And I was like, oh yeah, whatever, Betty. But yeah, I mean, also obviously that's true. And it has been a long time since I have been introduced at any event by someone who has clearly really like read my work in like such a deep way. And that feels a lot like falling in love. So thank you so much for that. Wow. I haven't been at a literary reading either at all, like in several months, like maybe almost a year. What a delight to share a stage with Amber Dawn, who totally saves and changes my life all the time. In solidarity with Amber Dawn, like reading poems this whole time. And I think also everyone who is in this series is a poet. I'm going to read from 2 books of mine, my debut and also only collection of poetry, A Place Called No Homeland, and the aforementioned book of essays, I Hope We Choose Love. But everyone, including myself, thinks of I Hope We Choose Love as like a creative nonfiction essay collection. It's also actually a book of poetry. For every essay, there's like 2 poems in this book, but like, I don't know, maybe it says something about like what we gravitate toward, or what like the colonial book market puts emphasis on, because the poetry, poetry is like, I feel like the poetry in this book is kind of like the estrogen in my body to the testosterone in my body, and like the prose is like the testosterone, like it dominates, but like, what happens if we really give time to the poetry estrogen? That isn't deep. I just hoped that it kind of would sound that way. Anyway, this poem is called 3 Love Stories. 1, white hipster queer. When I stepped through the door of the hipster cafe where all the white queers with the asymmetrical haircuts and tattoos of weird shit, like cats and vegetables, like to hang out and talk about Judith Butler and pretend that they aren't gentrifying this formerly working class / Hasidic Jewish neighborhood, your head will turn. You will think to yourself that I am the one who does not belong. With my thick black ethnic hair and darkly made up Asian eyes, not really wearing any makeup today, but I used to, and mouth plump and luscious from the stub of matte gold lipstick that I inherited from a femme poet sex worker auntie. White queers are always thinking that other people don't belong in the spaces they decide belong to them. Like, after finding out we were neighbors at campus, Butch once told me indignantly that they didn't think I was the, quote, kind of person who lived in St. Henry, as though white transmasculine boys from Oakville were indigenous to Montreal's old factory district. For reasons you do not understand, your heart will begin to race and your palms will sweat and you will swallow hard with the throat suddenly run dry of, quote, radical queer politics and the latest, most fashionable gender neutral pronoun. Your eyes will linger over the sweet curve of my Adam's apple, slight bulge of my rosebud breast, languorous swell of hips and thighs leading down to the sharp clack of 2-inch heels. You will look again. Notice the telltale scars on my arms, the mark on my face where the shadow of my father's palm still burns 9 years later. I don't wear foundation. Don't try to soften my masculine jaw or disguise the lines at the corners of my eyes, honey. I am, as of yesterday, 30 years old. That's an old, hard femme in trans woman years, and I don't soften anything. As I walk past your table, you will keep on looking. You will stare and stare without knowing why. You've never even touched a body like mine before, but I guarantee you will dream about it. White hipster queer. I am the most beautiful girl you have ever seen, too. Airplane military sex dream, man. We meet sitting next to each other on the airplane to Halifax, and your body starts the conversation for you. All blonde hair and blue eyes, legs a mile long, and biceps big and round as grapefruits. You can have anyone, anything you want, your body says. And what you want is to talk to me. And I'm surprised at first before I remember that I am now a petite Asian lady with good bone structure rather than a gawky, skinny, effeminate Chinese boy. Remarkable, the effect that repackaging has on the market value of a product. You're a military man, you tell me, a combat veteran and currently a search and rescue specialist. And then you ask me what I do. I think about telling you the truth, that I'm being flown to Dalhousie University to perform my trans femme survivor poems to an auditorium full of sensitive college queers. Instead, I say that my name is Anastasia. I'm a clinical psychologist specializing in early childhood mental disorders, and I'm giving a guest lecture for a research conference. You can take the hustler out of the boy, turn him into a girl, and put her in grad school, but you can't make her stop hustling. All's fair in love and mile-high flirtation, baby. Your eyes light up at the words child mental disorder? You start to tell me all about your autistic son, his obsession with cars, his gift for mathematics, the service dog you just applied for, how your wife couldn't accept the diagnosis at first, how she cried and cried as you held her in your bedroom at night when she was sure that your son was asleep and and couldn't hear her. It's the moisture that wells in your eyes as you say it that I like most about you, as I nod and murmur and tell you what a good husband, father, man you are, as the edge of your palm brushes mine, and you blush pink as the lights in the plane go down. Airplane, military, search and rescue man. I wish I could tell you about all the nights I dreamed of you, wanted you, burned and ached and wept, knowing I could never have you, be held by you, be safe in those muscled arms that once held a machine gun and fired it at people of color in distant countries so far away from the house that your son sleeps so soundly. Heterosexual said you didn't want me because I was too fucked up, too weird, too ugly, too gross, freaky, faggot, tranny, whore. Radical queer said I couldn't love you because I was betraying the revolution with my desire. Well, airplane, military, sex dream man, let me tell you a secret that you might not understand, that I am just beginning to learn. Let me tell you, as the lights go down and your hand grips mine and your skin blushes hot, I can love you. I can love whomever, whenever, however the fuck I want. 3, trans femme warrior girl. All I can think to say is, thank God we're trans. Thank God for the childhood spent learning how to stoke the fire of longing to come and become in secret. We could have been normal boys. We weren't. We could have been just normal boys, content in the violence, the privilege, no wanting, no waiting, no fierce, hard magic made from the sacrifice of blood beneath fingernails. Thank God for our bodies, for the lingering hairs dusting the hollows of cheeks and points of chins that return each morning and resist all plucking and shaving and trimming and bleaching and waxing and lasers. We are that tough, girl, that hard to beat up, chow down, that hard to make disappear. Thank God for our hard won, hard femme glamour, for the charms we grew out of bodies, luscious gardens, and hardy as weeds, thank God. For the locks who grew out long and dyed unapologetic colors like neon pink and sea green and deep ocean blue in honor of the warrior fairies and mermaids we pretended to be as kids. Thank God for your lips, so awkward and soft as we kissed for the first time. Thank God for the broad arch of your shoulders as I leaned against you. Thank God for your palms that you pressed against mine. Thank God for the jokes we made about converting to political lesbianism as we searched for something to love in each other, uncertain if we still remembered how after entire lives spent being taught not how to love ourselves. Thank God for the mingling of our perfume and sweat, for the fingers you crept up the back of my skirt, the jangling nerves of my imperfect consent at once wanting and not wanting and wanting to stop wanting, the wanting, oh wanting. Thank God that I wanted me, wanted you. Thank God for the beat of your pulse, the heat of your skin, the thrust of your abdomen pressed against mine. Trans femme warrior girl, I am reaching for you, thank God. I will sing our song for as long as I live. Okay, this next poem is called Book Fetish. So for the past 3 weeks, okay, like this poem was written a long time ago, so it's really like for the past like 7 years or something, I've carried a copy of Amber Dawn's memoir, How Poetry Saved My Life, in my purse. It's a slender volume, fits nicely tucked alongside the eyeliner, compact mirror, switchblade, cell phone, lipstick, you know, my femme talismans, my femme tools. And I take it with me everywhere, on the metro to pour over while ignoring the catcallers, to pay what you can, queer dance parties to glance at while hiding in the bathroom from my exes, to school where the nice white ladies who are my classmates in the social work department are curious to know what I'm reading and then say, oh, politely when I tell them it's a lesbian sex worker's autobiography. How interesting. Is it for research? Yeah, of a sort. I am researching queer history, femme future. I am researching my own survival. My thesis is my life. Amber Dawn says, lying is the work of those who have been taught that their truths have no value. Reading that one line makes me want to slide myself between the book's covers, cry myself to sleep. I've always needed books, the way some of my punk queer friends need cigarettes or weed or clear packets of Molly the size of a thumbnail. Without them, I get fidgety, anxious, start to sweat, can't have a good time, can't get down, can't see the point of paying rent or going to work or having sex. I hoard my books, hide them in unconventional places, like a rat lining its nest inside my pillowcases, under the mattress, in the underwear drawer, in the crisper of the fridge, a leftover reflex from childhood, when my parents would take them away to punish me, or my sister would rip them up just to see me cry. That worked better than hitting me, they said, because I cared more about my books than I cared about my body. I learned from this that the best way to control somebody you love, to make them behave, to keep them in line is to threaten the things they hold dearest, to take away the things that make them free. When I was 16 years old, I discovered queer poetry, poems about boys becoming girls, about boys desiring boys, girls fucking girls, and everything in between. I knew immediately that I loved that I loved and needed these poems to change my life, to make my escape, to become somebody different. I needed these poems, but they came printed in books I couldn't afford since I was never allowed to have a job or keep any money. And this was how I learned to steal books. Paperbacks are easiest, especially thin ones. You can roll them right up and put them in your sleeve or your waistband. But hell, nobody suspects a cute little Asian girl like me of shoplifting anyway, do they? If I was black or brown, this might be a different story. I stole the books I wanted so bad, like a rat stealing the blue eggs from a robin's nest. I stole Gloria Anzaldúa and Audre Lorde and June Jordan and Michael Ondaatje and Allen Ginsberg and Maya Angelou. I stole them because I loved them, or at least that's what I said. I probably could have borrowed them from the library too, but that wasn't enough for me. I needed to own the things that I loved. Someday, I'm going to put every single book I own into a big wooden chest. From slim paperback volumes to hardcover bricks. I'm going to drag them all out to the roof of the highest skyscraper I can break into. They'll be taken aback at first by all that expansive open blue. They'll have grown accustomed to the dark insides of my jealous custodianship, to being tucked inside purses and slipped inside pillowcases, hidden between mattresses and crammed into refrigerator crispers. But little by little, they'll start to flutter their pages, catch the wind beneath their covers, soar off into the sky. I'll wave goodbye and whisper, I'm sorry. And because they are wise, I think they'll forgive me. So, you know, a funny poem and then a downer poem. And then I was like, I'm going to do that. I'm going to alternate funny poems and downer poems. And I was like, oh no, that love stories poem is the only funny poem I have. So it's downer poems from here on out. Not too down, hopefully. So these are some of the estrogen poems from I Hope We Choose Love. Yeah, it's funny. I wrote this book, I Hope We Choose Love. And the subtitle is A Trans Girl's Notes from the End of the World. And then from this book, I got offered like an advice column at Extra, which is like the queer newspaper here in Canada. And I love Extra, they're so awesome. And they were like, why don't we like play up this end of the world branding? So my advice column is called Advice for the Apocalypse. And then the pandemic happened and I was like, I can see the future. And I was like really happy about it for 1 second. I was like, I'm a mutant. I have a superpower. And then I was like, you can't like change the future, even though I can't see it. So I want to return my superpower and like trade it in for another one. Maybe you can type into the chat if you could trade in your current superpower and get another one. What would it be? I'll hang on for like 5 seconds so that you can do that. Okay, you could trade in your current superpower and get a new one. What would the new one be? 5, 4, 3, 2.5, 2, 1. Oh my gosh, no one? I will type mine. No memory. Ooh, that's a good one. Lol, I love the group therapy. I mean, I don't do therapy anymore, but I did for several years and I got excellent reviews. Heart signed an LCSW. Oh my God, we don't have LCSW in Canada. We have like RSW, but I think I know what that is. Licensed clinical, right? Yes. God bless the clinical social workers, or maybe not, because social workers have done a lot of bad things. Insta transport, Taking care of others so much. Oh, that's the old one. New superpower. Taking care of myself. Yes. Yes. What are you doing here? Go eat an ice cream. Okay, so this poem, no, I won't. I'll do this one. This poem is called Growing. Let us not speak of what happened between us. Instead, let us speak of what happened after. My skin became a shroud while the poison of your past sank into my bones. Organs ossified, my liver on ice. Electric shock signals hardwired into the matrix of nerves binding my brain, heart, and spine. Thoughts locked on loop, muscles flooded with memory. Trauma is the body torn out of time. 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 No prayer had the power to reach me then. No holy water could anoint this flesh. Faith is the connective tissue that binds us all to the celestial bodies of the universe. Faith is trust in the world, and mine was torn. So when they came for me, eyes shiny, arms spread, I could not tell the difference between the ones who came to help and the ones who came to feast. I live in the earth now, stomach full of stones, my eyes full of dirt, maggots wriggling in the chambers of the heart. But let us not speak of what happened between us. Let us speak of the tree that is sprouting from the center of my throat, of the luminescent fungi growing on the inside of my skull, of the flowers that still bloom in every dead part of me. So I Hope We Choose Love is about, I don't know, I sum it up as like it's a book about transformative justice, but it's not like the kind of book that people are kind of asking for when they ask, like, I would like to read this book about transformative justice. I'm trying to write this book now, like the book that people are looking for, because I think the book that people are looking for is like the how-to manual, right? They're like, how do we do it? And that's a really good thing to look for. But at the time I was writing this book, I was writing about like what it feels like to be trying to do transformative justice and to be failed by it, right? Or to fail in it. Like, why do we need transformative justice? And like, how do we get there? And around the time that I was writing this book, and then even more so after I wrote it, I think because people are looking for answers and then they found this book and then they like didn't get the answers maybe. Like I get all these emails like every month, sometimes every week from strangers who like have their transformative justice questions for me. And they're really intense sometimes, you know, they're like, you know, they're from people who have been harmed and they want help bringing the harm doer into accountability. And then sometimes, most of the time actually, they're from people who have been named as harm doers and then they don't know how to fix that. And so they're like, Kai Cheng Thom, like I've done something terrible, help me out. And I'm like, I don't know really who you are, where you are. You can't do that. But you know, every time I get one of these emails, my heart breaks a little more. And then I'm like, what? Like, I was gonna be a lawyer. I just need you to know. Like, when I was in grade 6, I was like, I'm gonna be a lawyer and make a lot of money and live in a mansion, or at least like a paralegal, you know, and like wear a nice skirt. So this poem is about like, why did I not become a paralegal? It's called There's Another Girl Out There. Somewhere in the vast expanse of the multiverse, there's another girl out there. Trans, Chinese, born in the West with a heart full of Eastern wind and fox's fire. She took a different turn than you did, though. Somewhere back where the roads wind tight around the spool of our silly, mundane, ultimately irrelevant in the grand scheme of things fates. She chose money, you chose art. She chose safety, you chose adventure. She filial piety. You, self-actualization. She, self-preservation. You, self-sacrifice. She, common sense. And you, revolution. She works in a bank somewhere, probably, or maybe a mid-level marketing company. She has her own cubicle by the window on the 16th floor. She decorates it with posters made from the covers of old pulp science fiction and fantasy novels. Her job is nothing, the decently paid absence of vocation filled by spreadsheets and memos and emails, days full of language and no meaning. Her coworkers are patronizing. They like nothing more than welcoming her to womanhood, a state she's existed in more or less comfortably for 10 years. But they are kind. She likes to work late, not out of any sense of loyalty to the company, but because she enjoys silence and watching the sunset. On evenings when it rains or snows, she pretends she is living inside a giant snow globe. She takes the train home to her boyfriend, a white boy who drinks a little too much with his buddies on the weekend, but is sweet and decent overall. They watch movies together, cuddle, have boring but affectionate sex. They won't have children. He doesn't want them and she can't. That, at least, you still have in common. There are things she wants and fears. This commonsensical girl who visits her parents every other weekend and endures their misplaced advice with politely concealed boredom. But she doesn't think about them much. She has nice clothes, a pretty condominium she is ever so slowly paying the mortgage on. On weekends, she goes jogging, cooks meals, goes to coffee with friends. She used to volunteer at the local queer community center, but she doesn't do that anymore. The politicking and infighting are endless there, a serpent eating its own tail. And she's smart enough to know that this isn't something she needs or wants. Don't let drowning people pull you underwater. She learned that in lifeguarding classes at the community center when she was a teenager. And unlike you, she took the advice to heart. It's not so bad being trans and middle class and Chinese, at least not in this big city where difference is common, if not always celebrated, is it? The catcalls and stares, bureaucratic inconveniences, and social gaps. She just ignores them. She's a skilled survivor and she knows to appreciate what she's got. She tries not to lust after what she doesn't have, though the wind blows hard in her heart sometimes, tugging at her ribs, making her chest ache. On summer nights, she likes to leave her boyfriend sleeping in bed and ride the elevator all the way up to the rooftop garden of the condo. There's a pool there with water salty as tears and blue as freedom. She dives in, holds her breath as long as she can, thinks about mermaids, whales, jellyfish, buried treasure. She holds and holds and holds her breath. Till she can hear her heart pounding, lungs screaming. Her vision blurs and her head spins. She comes up, breaks the surface, floats on her back, looking at the stars. Somewhere, she thinks, out in the vast multiverse, there is another girl. And I'll read you one more, and then let's do Q&A, and then let's all go home. Oh wait, we are all already home, probably. This poem is called For Girls Who Are Addicted to Hurting Themselves. I used to be like a spoken word poet. Like I was really into slam, and like when I was 19, I was like, it's my mission in life to unite the written word and the spoken word. And then I was like, there are probably other things I can do with my life. But you can probably still hear like the slam poem in me, right? A slam poet in me. And this poem is like an old school slam poem. So like, I want to hear you snapping, through your muted screens. For girls who are addicted to hurting themselves, never forget who you are. When the wind starts to blow in your rib cage and the night starts to fall on your spine, when you look at your hands, so clean and so smooth, so gentle, so pretty, so brittle, so sweet, like two dead branches of coral wrested from the bottom of the sea and placed on velvet in a glass box, and you wonder, who do these belong to? Remember, There was a time when you tore flesh open with your nails. There was a time when men feared your teeth. Now, when people turn to you in wonder as you claw your hair and hurl yourself against windows and ask, have you gone crazy? You should take joy in knowing that they are seeing you for the first time. It has been a long damn time since you looked yourself in the mirror and saw the girl who could haunt someone's nightmares. It has been a long freaking time since you wrote a poem that could crack glass. When did you learn that people preferred you this way? When did you decide that belonging with someone else was better than belonging to yourself? Remember, you are the girl who chose to wear red, who dreamed of fire, of flight, and went looking for the wolf in the woods. You are the girl who ran between the trees, hair wild in the wind. You are the girl who stitched a donkey skin to her flesh and haunted the countryside, searching for a life to call her own. Remember, when you were 16 in the hospital, locked in a glass box, and the policewoman who took you there smiled and said, you'll make a nice girl. Everyone loves a nice girl. Even then you knew that in your place, a nice girl would not have survived. Somehow you let yourself fall into somebody else's dream. This tiny palace of crystal and soft fabric, so nice, so sweet, so safe. You cut your shadow from your feet and put it in a box so you could stay. Still, your bones know you are not this girl. You are not his girl. You are no one's girl. And you know how this story ends. You must take your hands back. You must take your hair back. You must take your shadow back. You must take your teeth back. There is a moral to this story, and you were born to tell it. Safe and free are not the same thing. Living and alive are not the same thing. Okay. Thanks, everybody. Yay, poetry. Yay. Segue reading. It's Segue, right? Not Seek or Segue.
I believe it is Segue, but I think some people say Seg. I've heard
Sounds
both.
good too.
I know that James Sherry who has founded it, is in the audience. I'm sure that at some point he could tell us what the official line is, but then maybe kind of like GIF or GIF, we would reject what the author says. Thank you, Kai Cheng, so much. That was beautiful. So we have a few minutes left for Q&A. I certainly have questions. I'm sure Imogen has questions, but we get to ask our questions all the time. So I do want to kick it over to the audience. We have that Q&A function at the bottom of our screen. If you guys want to send your questions there, we will ask them and moderate them. That'll be great. Imogen, do you have anything to start us with?
Yeah, I have a kind of sort of convoluted question about writing process, which is basically like, both of you write in so many different forms, whether it's a poem or a novel, or, you know, and then so many kinds of poems, whether it's like lyric or slam or like whatever it is, and also essays. And I mean, the major, I think, like through line of both of y'all's work is it's so almost like revelatorially, which is not a word, but I'm gonna, you know, segue, sieg, whatever. It's so somatic, you know, it's like, it's so present in the flesh and bones. And I'm just kind of wondering, when you're processing the, okay, you're laughing so much at me right now.
Sorry, it's not you. It's that James was upset about Seek. I apologize.
Oh, okay.
It's a great question. I'm sorry.
Carry on. I didn't see in the sidebar. Anyway, how do you know, like, when you're navigating this like personal space but also storytelling, what form you want the writing to go in, or does it just kind of decide for itself?
Kai, I love you.
Amber Dawn, I love you too.
Kai Cheng Thom, you're like the whippoorwill song in the dark nights of my uncertainty. Thanks for being my good friend.
Whoa. I'm the whippoorwill song. You're the whippoorwill song. Can I write you a poem called You're the Whippoorwill Song?
I think it's an intertextual poem that we've started to write together right now,
Yeah,
which I think segues nicely into this question. I do think that there is some element of the form finding me, at least. I can say more in poetry in terms of what content makes me more vulnerable. I feel like poetry is a better house for my vulnerability, if you will. I think about how much I've been able to work through and work out on the page simultaneously, and it mostly ends up being poetry. Like if something is still very acutely painful for me, I'm writing it as a poem first before I think about other genres. And then I also just, I don't want my memories to be homeless, you know, like I want them to have a really elegant house, like a really nice house where every room is curated in just such a way. And this is how I think of poetry. Like it's like this elegant house that all my fucking shit gets to move into and be like, wow, I never thought I'd live in such a nice house. So that's sort of how I conceive of poetry. And I think that's why poetry for me comes most often. I don't know, Kai, also form, what do you think about form? I also noticed you do a slower reading in the poems from I Hope We Choose Love than in a place called No Homeland. So I'm like, not only form, but pace and rhythm, like all of it, you have such a wide range of expression. So how are you finding it?
I love that pass to me. Thank you so much. I'm actually still composing You Are the Whippoorwill song in my head. But that might be the first poem I write in like 8 or 9 months. So you heard it here first. And I actually, I noticed that my reading changed when I went on tour for both this book and Fierce Femmes, because those books came out within like 4 or 5 months of one another. And then I had a children's book come out within 7 months of that. So I was like, my debut was like, bam, a debut, right? And I got to do a few shows with you actually, and also some with Catherine Hernandez and a few other like literary writers, but also, you know, Catherine Hernandez is a theater artist and you're a really seasoned performer yourself, Amber Dawn. And I like was able to like something opened in me and I was like, oh, I don't have to do slam voice all the time. And I say this like I mock slam voice, but I also love slam voice, right? Like what I love about slam poetry, as like, you know, ridiculous and ridiculed it can be sometimes, is that it was first of all my first genre, and that it is so somatic, that it is like the body of like an incredibly earnest person most of the time, like hurling themselves for better for worse, you know, from the stage. And the sincerity of that, the sincerity to dive into cliche, both sonically and in terms of imagery, is actually really precious to me. But I think, you know, I Hope We Choose Love came second. And so the slower reading is kind of more there. I have a bit more of like the canlit inflection, you know, like the way I think like a literary poet would read. And that's not like an actual choice, like, or like, it's not like a really intentional choice. It's just how I hear the poems in my head. And it's interesting. Like, I also think that, like, I think that reflects something like that I'm trying to do with my body of work, which is like to grow and like to get older and like have more time to slow down. And also because, well, I don't know. I mean, I think there's something really powerful about like giving body, well, and this is my whole thing when I was 19, is like giving body to the words with your voice. Does that make sense? Like actually creating the soundscape with your voice of how you meant the words to sound when you were writing them on the page. Yeah, I don't know if that really answers the question, but there we are.
That's so beautiful. Thank you. We have I mean, the Q&A function is full of praise for you guys. They're from someone who it's maybe a friend, Jillian. Do you know how absolutely knocked down wonderful you all are? Which I think is rhetorical, but it's very kind and true. Amber Dawn, you said one of the other questions. Amber Dawn, you said maybe poetry is when we both confess certain parts of our story and keep other parts for ourselves. How do you navigate this in your writing?
Yeah, I bet you that's a question from someone who is writing and working with the personal as part of their work. Like that feels like a question from another writer who's perhaps working with some trauma-informed body of work themselves. Just a hunch I have. I mean, really trial and error for me, and like some pretty disastrous fails. And it's constant. So for today, I had a reading planned. I thought I would read some of the unpublished excerpts from My Art is Killing Me. And in this unpublished excerpt, I come out as having schizophrenia as my diagnosis, and talk a little bit about like how mental health and creative practice go together. And then there's like this long sex scene too. It's kind of messy, but I wasn't ready to publish it, and I knew that. But I tried maybe a couple months after the book came out to read it aloud in not a Zoom event, but an event where during the pandemic, a few artists went and read in a theater and was just recorded by like a camera person and one other tech. And then that was played. And it was a disaster. I felt terrible. I went into some really disastrous mental health places. So I think a lot of it is trial and error for me. And when my memoir came out in 2013, you know, there was some acute pain that I felt afterwards, you know, and I relapsed, and, you know, really had to work on my sobriety again. So I do want to say to any writer who's working some deep vulnerability in our work, that there is a lot of learning through the process, and it can be like some lessons that don't feel great. I've hit a lot of those lessons that don't feel great. And actually now I always start off with a bit of a mission statement, or a bit of I'm a Virgo, so I like process. So I'm like, you know, what's our mission statement? What's our outline? And now when I'm starting a new project, even if it's a single poem, that's working something I know is going to be thematically challenging, I kind of have my boundary list, like you might give to a new date, where you're like, here's my yeses, things that we can do together, and then here's my boundary list, like here's my no, that's not going to be an activity we do together, I don't like it. So I almost do that with my work now, like I kind of have my boundary or my no list, like my no-go, and that can change. I mean, just like what I might do with a romantic partner, a date changes, you know. But yeah, I actually take a lot of trying to figure out boundaries from AA, from my sobriety, and also from kink, you know, like and I apply that to my writing practice, and it's really helped me. Yeah, it's really helped me. So I think what I'm saying there is, like, look for other sources in your life where you've been able to really clearly, this is my advice to anyone, not necessarily just to the question asker, but where you really clearly have been able to establish, you know, what's a healthy risk, what's a risk that you're ready, or what's a vulnerability that you're ready for, and what's on your no-go list. Think about places in your real life where you've been able to establish those kind of boundaries, and work that into what you do for your writing practice. Yeah, I mean, writing's fucking hard enough. Like, I'm no longer interested in like suffering for my art to that degree. I thought I needed to when I was young. And definitely my mentors were like, push yourself, you know, like, you're this rare voice, no one hears from you, like, push into this. And ultimately that wasn't a good path for me. Having a lot of boundaries is a way better path for me. So
we love your boundaries, Amber Dawn.
Yeah, I mean, I that's a really beautiful answer. And I'm thinking, you know, about how like how queer writers and trans writers are really there, you know, this demand is levied on us to talk about like to sort of like testify to the authenticity of your subject position, so that somebody listening to this can say like, aha, I recognize your pain, and I'm conferring on you that you like are somebody who genuinely suffered it. And you're like, well, I know that because I lived it. So my life is one thing, but my writing can be something else at the same time. You know, like clearly you can draw on yourself. I have there's another question for Kai Cheng. Some of your poems involve imaginative, speculative, or alternate realities. What is the appeal of writing poetry specifically as a form for this kind of thinking?
Oh, that's such a good question. A form question, a genre question. I love this. Okay, well, because it's not a demand to the autobiographical or like to the confession. I love this. Okay, well, I don't know if it's so much that poetry is like the appeal for that as it is that like fantasy particular or like genre is like genre like speculative genre is like the appeal for me always, no matter what form I'm writing in actually. Why do I love genre? I actually just did a workshop with like about 50 trans writers of all ages, which is really nice because, you know, I like the youth thing, but also it's like really great when like there's like an all ages thing for queer folks and trans folks. And everybody was there who was like deeply into genre. Primarily fantasy, sci-fi, spec fic, fabulous magical realism stuff, but also other genre. And I think what's really like deeply resonant with me and probably a lot of other queer and trans folks that I know is that we already are like creatures of the fabulous, right? Like in that we're fabulous, but also in that we are not meant to exist, are monstrous in like the mythological way, as well as the like kind of, you know, in like pejorative way. And fantasy is this opportunity to explore realities that resonate with truths of the heart. You know, like I'm obsessed with this idea of like fiction, fact, lying, and truthfulness. Because I was a pathological liar for a while in my youth, and that's kind of that came out in my first novel, you know, Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars, where the protagonist is really exploring this idea that she gets from Blanche Du Bois in Tennessee Williams' Streetcar Named Desire, that lies are about a truth of the heart. Especially when they come from a pathological place, they're about expressing the truth of the heart. And that for me is the appeal of speculative work or fantasy, and that's why that shows up in poetry so much. You know, that like fairy tale landscape. If you're like a reader of my work, then you'll recognize like the fairy tale landscape, or like the alternate universe landscape, or like the obsession with aliens, that kind of thing. All of that is, you know, both like the nostalgia that I bring to it from my childhood spent reading those kinds of works, and also the opportunity to like look at the self and the truth of the world through a lens that shows us another kind of reality. And I'm actually going to try my hand at a graceful pass to Amber Dawn, because you also write a lot, and I think in speculative. I mean, I'm thinking about Sub Rosa, your novel here, and I remember you saying at some panel we were on together about how genre is a house, and we can put our story into that house, and then we get to dress it up the way we want. And I wonder if that, like, if you still believe that, or if you believe that only about fiction and not about poetry, or whatever thoughts you might have to offer around this.
Also, nice pass. Thank
Thank
you.
you.
I mean, it's a big question, you know, but I do think that so many of us have roots in science fiction, fantasy, magic realism, and sort of the other like highly imaginative genres. And whether or not like our sort of literal selves are being represented in some of these works that we may have read when we're young, I feel like the characters and the world building are mutable enough that, like, for me, I felt like I could imagine self better and some speculative literatures than and sort of literary realism. I didn't read much as a kid though, so I should put that caveat. Like I probably didn't start reading until my like mid-20s. But you know, Kai and I have rocked this before together. Actually, we were in a show that was like had a 5-piece band called Here Be Monsters, where we sort of explored like the self and the monstrous together. I mean, it's great. I think it's I think there's plenty of reasons why certain writers with certain positionality might be attracted to the monstrous or the speculative, perhaps. But I also think it's just available to all of us, to just think about where our like lived reality intersects with something divine or monstrous or fantastic. Why wouldn't we want to write that? My thesis was sub rosa. It was speculative, and actually at the time, I'm so old that in my creative writing program, I was one of the first speculative theses ever, and I had 3 advisors drop me. Like they didn't want to. They didn't want to have a graduate student that was writing a speculative fiction book. Like it wasn't sought after then the way it's sought after now. I'm so happy to see like badass writers like Kai Cheng Thom change the way that literary communities even regard the fantastic. So thanks, Kai. Thanks for doing that work for us. We love you.
I give the credit to like Larissa Lai and like
Did you two know that you're just gonna get a love fest with us together? Like, did you two know that we would basically spend any portion of the Q&A just complimenting each other,
rooting over each other? Like
Well, that segues really well into the last question here, which I feel like the unpacking of this question has been in the passing back and forth of questions between the two of you.
Wait, Imogen, could I have a question that isn't, could I interrupt?
Yeah, totally.
I'm
Interrupt
so sorry.
me.
No, I had one for you guys, which was, I know that you write with like specific audiences in mind, but also that your work like really travels far beyond those. And I'm curious where, like if you've encountered like reaction from someone who was reading your work who you didn't expect to be reading your work, and what that's been like for you.
I got nothing. What do you got, Kai?
Yes. Like yes, that has happened. And okay, yeah, well, so I mean, my easy answer to this is that Emma Watson read my novel, and I was like, "Whoa, what?" And because she chose it for her feminist book club, and that Julie Andrews read my children's book and chose that for her podcast. And so these are my easy answers. I think
okay,
like
flex.
Yes. I was read by famous people who then had their assistants contact me about it. But I think what I mean, this is a few things for me, like particularly like what I take away from like the celebrity endorsements is that work that is written with a specific audience in mind is work that is relevant for lots more people. And I think my children's book was sort of meant to have universal appeal, but Fierce Femmes really was not. Like I was like writing to like 5 people in Montreal, and that Emma Watson thought it was interesting, and then gave it to her audience, who some of them also thought it was interesting, says to me like that it really confirms for me like this idea that the folks at Topside Press, which is now defunct, unfortunately, but that they were pushing around translit, which was like when you write to the people who you are part of, to your own community, other people will look at that and find a depth there if they're open to it, that is really resonant and much more interesting than something sort of written that's sort of like dumbed down for the mainstream, for lack of a better word. But the person so there's like what I find really interesting is that I tend to get a lot of like straight cisgender like bros in their 30s who read Fierce Femmes, which is like, I wish I had a copy of it on me, but it's like a very pink book. The cover is pink. There's like a cake on it and like a high-heeled shoe. And I'm just like, I love the idea of like these like hipster bros with like big beards and like their like caps, like reading Fierce Femmes and Notorious Liars on a bus. And they always come up to me at like, usually like in a bookstore or something. This hasn't happened in a long time because of COVID, and they're like, yeah, I like really like this. Like it's like I haven't really like read anything like this before. Like I'm like not like part of the community, but like I'm sort of on a journey, and And then, lots of disclosure happens. And I wouldn't normally like this, except I find it kind of sweet and like funny. And I have certainly had like a fair number of cool hookups because of that. So yeah, that's what I'll say about this question.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Amber, Dawn, did that spark anything for you?
No, that's the answer. Just I'm good. I'm good.
That's beautiful. That's great. Okay, well, my curiosity is satisfied for the moment. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us. I think we're just about out of time. Yeah, Imogen, was there anything that you wanted to close with?
There was a closing question, but I feel like it's been sort of answered. It's been sort of embodied this whole time, which is, how has femship saved your lives? I think,
Yeah, well, Amber, Dawn, you save my life all the time. I think I will say, okay, I'm gonna tell a little story. That's okay, Amber, Dawn. And there will be no details in this story, but Amber, Dawn and I met at like a weird time in my life, I will say. And you were just so kind, Amber, Dawn. And you were like, we were doing like a show together, and you were just so, I thought you were super glamorous. I still think you're super glamorous. And I was like, oh my God, it's Amber, Dawn. Freaking out, and also freaking out in general. And you were like, do you want a fish snack? And you kept on like
fish cakes in my purse. Like I had a plastic bag full of like squid and fish cakes in my purse. Yeah, that checks out.
Kept on pushing these fish cakes at me, and I was like, oh my God, you really care about me. And that's my story about femship. Like I like admire you so much, Amber, Dawn, but I also like I think of you as like deeply kind, and like that's like the core of like femship friendship for me, because you like I don't know, like there's that resonance in you, and like that's the resonance I find in other femmes. There's like Jillian. I just want to acknowledge Jillian in the chat, like holding it down for us.
Yes.
Thank you, Jillian. You're also amazing. Everyone should read Jillian's book. And like that solidarity, it really means a lot. Yeah.
I think it's I mean it's important regardless, but for me and Kai Cheng and Jillian Christmas again, who's has joined us online, and we know and what kind of emotional labor can be put on us, and it's really important to have those femships that are nourishing and that like a place to decompress and express anger in a way that's not going to be anger and grief and sadness in a way that's not going to have any consequences attached to it, and develop strategy together, whether it's like, how do we survive this mainstream festival poetry reading, or like, what do we do about this sexual harasser who's in the queer literary scene, or like, what fucking shade of lipstick is going to work the best with the stage lighting tonight. Like those things are actually make me be able to keep going as an artist. Like, of course, I want to always strive to think about my craft and the message that I could possibly be in conversations with readers and with other artists. But like those small intimacies that are safe and nourishing that I have with other femme artists, and in particular Kai Cheng Thom, is just, I would have fucking phoned it in a long time ago. I would have quit. So I don't quit, because Kai, you're the whippoorwill song in the dark night of uncertainty.
That's my answer too. I redact my answer and use Amber Dawn's.
That's very beautiful. Thank you both so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for
so
this
much.
beautiful evening together. Gosh, this has been so heartwarming. If you haven't donated to our audience, you can still donate via PayPal, Venmo, or through the Segue website. Next week, our second to last reading in Images in My Curation, we are going to be featuring Jackie S., whose book Daryl is coming out this year. Recommended to literally everybody. And Diana Cage, former editor of Otterbacks. It's going to be really badass, and a beautiful sequel to tonight, I think. Kai Cheng, Amber, Dawn, thank you both so much for joining us. Everybody stay very safe.
Thank you all. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.